Good morning, everyone. My name is Evelyn Fanning, and I'm a Senior Health Promotion and Improvement Officer with the HSE, and I'm also Chair of the Galway City Alcohol Forum. On behalf of the Forum, I would like to welcome you here today to our webinar on alcohol and brain health across the life course. And our aim today really is to provide a broad overview of how alcohol impacts on brain health at every stage of life, from pregnancy to adolescent, into adulthood, and into later years. And I suppose it's brought to you today, the webinar is brought to you by the Galway City Alcohol Forum. And some of you may be familiar with the forum and some of you may not. So the forum itself is brings together a diverse range of agencies across Galway City who are, I suppose, working together in our committed to working together to tackle alcohol-related harm. And we operate under the structures of the Western Regional Drug and Alcohol Task Force. And there's a number of agencies represented, which include the HSE, the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force, An Garda Síochána, Atlantic Technological University, the City Council, the City Partnership, the Galway City Community Network, Galway Children and Young People Services Committee, Healthy Galway City and Youth Org Ireland. So together those agencies have come together. We've come together, I suppose, this forum is in existence over 10 years at this stage, and we've come together in recognition of, I suppose, of the significant impact that alcohol has, not just on individual health and well-being, but also families, communities and society as a whole. The forum, anyway, in terms of our recent plan was launched in 2024, and it has 3 goals. And one is around, I suppose, communication and public awareness. And the second one is in relation to, I suppose, trying to strengthen how we use and collect data. And the third one is around trying to, I suppose, build the capacity of organisations to respond effectively to alcohol-related harm. Our goal this morning is very much centred around increasing, I suppose, increasing understanding among a wide range of stakeholders on how alcohol affects brain health at all ages, and to signpost to some useful resources and supports. So the format for this morning, we're going to hear from, we've 2, I suppose, invited speakers, and after those presentations, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat at any time, and we'll do our best to address those as many of those as we can in the time that we have available. The presentations, as I said, are being recorded this morning, and recording will stop before the Q&A to allow time for discussion. So I'm now delighted to introduce our first speaker, Katie Dunphy from the HSE Alcohol Programme. So Katie, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. So I'm appreciative of that. And just to introduce myself, my name is Katie Dunphy. I'm the project manager for the HSE Alcohol Programme. And I'm hoping mine will move on. Yes. So these are a few topics I'm going to just talk about today. So I'm going to introduce the HSE Alcohol Programme. I'm going to talk briefly about the alcohol use in Ireland, alcohol-related harms, and a few of the topics, specific topics that I'll be covering. So just broadly to let you know where I come from, we're part of HSE Health and Wellbeing. So our aims are to provide services that keep people healthy and well, and our focus is on prevention and early intervention, and we work with all people within society. So it's really to keep people well and prevent people from becoming unwell. So our vision specifically within the HSE Alcohol Programme is to reduce population alcohol consumption, reduce harms related from alcohol, and to work with all cohorts within society. So the children, families, communities, etc. And some of the key pieces of work that we have done to date, our askaboutalcohol.ie website has a lot of information. We're currently doing a review on that, so our information will be updated soon. We have communications campaigns. We work on developing resources for prevention of alcohol-related harms at young people, usually part of the SPHE curriculum. So Know the Score, the new curriculum that's coming in, and Making Healthy Choices, which is the junior cycle curriculum. We work on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or prenatal alcohol exposure harm, and then we are involved in the support, set up and support of integrated alcohol services throughout the country and other programs, but that gives you a snapshot. So then alcohol-related harms in Europe, but Europe actually has one of the highest levels of alcohol use per capita, and it then subsequently has a lot of the harms that are caused from alcohol. So just to give you kind of a little snapshot really of some of the harms, it causes a huge amount of deaths per year. It's a toxic, proactive, dependent producing substance. It's a type 1 or group 1 carcinogen, and it's a teratogen as well. So it is linked to cancer, brain harms, and a number of other challenges. So within Ireland, it is the 8th leading cause of all death in Ireland, and 4 people die every day due to alcohol use. That sounds really morbid, but that's the reality of the situation. And then with alcohol in the brain, alcohol is the leading modifiable trait, but also something that can be modified to improve brain health. It's also a modifiable threat to your overall physical health. So alcohol affects the human brain throughout the life course, from the very, very early stages all the way through. The range of neurological diseases and conditions that alcohol can actually cause or contribute to is huge. It's absolutely massive. I know when I first started looking into this, I couldn't get over just the range of challenges it causes or harms it causes. So I've put some of them there for you to see. And this is just the brain. This isn't even the cancer side of things. This is just what can happen within the brain. So it's quite staggering when you think of it that way. And there was one quote when I was reading a particular study that stood out to me, and it really gave me pause for thought. And that was, if these problems were caused by anything other than alcohol, it really would be difficult to imagine that, if something wouldn't be done, or, it would be so tolerated. And that's some of our challenges really within Ireland and in our society, is that we have a real, we just tolerate it. We just kind of accept it. We don't really consider a lot of the harms that alcohol can actually cause, because quite often people find it an enjoyable substance to consume. But it does come with those a number of consequences and a number of harms. But also, a lot of these can be modified, as we mentioned earlier. One of the things that we work on is alcohol and pregnancy. And really, an awful lot of people, they may be aware that alcohol in pregnancy isn't ideal, isn't the best thing at all, and should be avoided at all costs. But quite often people don't realize the extent of it. They don't really understand it a lot of the time, and think it's a little bit of fear mongering. So we have a lot of work to do on this particular area, because Ireland has the 3rd highest suspected rates of FASD, and we have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, sorry. And in Europe, we have one of the highest alcohol consumptions during pregnancy. So, it's something that we really have to get across to the public. Alcohol is a teratogen, so it does cross the placenta. So a lot of people think, oh yeah, look, the placenta will keep the baby safe and well. But alcohol crosses through that. It also doesn't filter it out within the body as well. So we really have to get across that there is, it's a very harmful substance to consume when pregnant. And it can cause a range of problems as listed there. So sometimes we get the question like, is there any safe time? There actually isn't, because there is no, there isn't really any safe time. It is known to have most harm early on, but it still can cause harm at any stage throughout the pregnancy or when breastfeeding. The other thing we get asked is like, is wine or is a particular substance safer to drink? No, unfortunately, ethanol is ethanol, alcohol is ethanol, and there is the body doesn't kind of go, oh no, wine is fine, but spirits are bad. There's no safe type. And then the other question we get asked, is there any safe amount? And unfortunately, there is no known safe amount of alcohol to consume during pregnancy. So just, there's no safe amount. So uh, for anybody who has an alcohol use disorder, trying to get support and help to cut down the alcohol use or to cut it out would be really important. And for anybody who doesn't have any dependence on alcohol, just cut it out completely if possible. So some of the supports that we have in place around this, there's an FASD awareness day every year, so we send information out to people. We do have a campaign that's going to be updated soon to talk about, the fact that no amount of alcohol is safe during pregnancy. And then we have another number of programs and projects in the planning. So then the next kind of life stage, alcohol in young people. So Ireland does have a high rate of binge drinking. So because of that, and that is a particularly harmful type of alcohol consumption for adolescents. That is something that we have to try and get out there. That again, alcohol is not a safe product for young people either. So the harmful consequences, they are quite wide ranging. So they can be acute harms, like from accidents or poisoning, or chronic consequences. So things like impulsivity, engaging in risky and violent behavior, sexual behaviors, suicide and self-harm. And one quote that came from the HRB series and Doyle et al. Young people are equally susceptible, if not more, to these harms, given that they're more likely to binge drink. So we do emphasize that the young people's brain is still developing, and it develops right up until the age of 25. So they're, avoiding alcohol as much as possible is so much better for young people. And I know that can be sometimes seem hard, but as a society, as in Ireland, we need to denormalize alcohol use and make it okay for everybody not to consume alcohol. It's not necessarily a rite of passage. It's not something that we should be encouraging, and we have to be also conscious that peers, parents, and society are the people giving young people the alcohol. So kind of need to stop that flow. We need to be very cognizant of the what it could do and what it can do for young people and do to young people. So reducing alcohol consumption would be very important for their developing brain. So then alcohol-related brain injury. This is something that is not as widely known. It's a collective term for a spectrum of conditions. And the alcohol can change the structure of the brain, but it can also change the function, so how the brain works. And this can impact an individual's day-to-day functioning. So their executive function, their planning, working memory, decision-making, coordination, emotional regulation, balance and coordination. So there's a lot of things that it can impact, and it can actually fundamentally change the brain. And with alcohol-related brain injury, there are currently more men than women who are diagnosed with alcohol-related brain injury. But that gap is narrowing because there are more and more women consuming alcohol, and also because it has a disproportional impact on women's health. And they can develop ARBI up to 10 years earlier than men. They have a greater susceptibility to alcohol related liver disease, and at an earlier age, cardiovascular disease and particular types of cancer, especially breast cancer. So then for the aging brain, alcohol use is a key factor in three particular neurologically mediated conditions. So dementia, strokes, and falls. So alcohol and dementia, that's a general term for neurodegenerative diseases that affect the brain's ability to remember, process information, and learn. So alcohol, with that, it can, the role of alcohol, it can cause brain cell death. It can be involved in thiamine deficiency. elevated blood pressure, and alcohol-related dementia, a particular type from long-term heavy alcohol use. Then strokes. People often don't think of this really when it comes to alcohol for some unusual reason. It's a condition that predominantly affects older people, but it can be ischemic or hemorrhagic. So drinking alcohol above low to moderate levels can make that, and particularly with binge drinking, can make it an increased risk factor. And then falls. Again, that's not something we think about as much or talk about as much, but it can impact coordination, can impact balance, and alcohol related falls they're one of the leading causes of injury for older people, even at lower levels of alcohol use. So it's something that has to be really, really mindful, especially for people over the age of 65. So because it can affect the balance, it can affect visual focus, and it can affect reaction time. So one of the things I mentioned a little earlier, it is a modifiable risk factor. So alcohol is one of those things that can be modified. So changing alcohol consumption, changing alcohol and consumption patterns is so important for overall health and the health of the brain. And just say that can be changed. And I know Dara will speak a lot more on what can be done and on that brain health side of things. But we do have some additional information. So on our Ask About Alcohol website, we have information on there. So we have information that's evidence-based and easy to read from clinical experts. So we would recommend people to have a look at that. And then we work on communications broader, on bigger campaigns around alcohol and alcohol-related harms. So then for our priorities for 2025, as mentioned before, alcohol and pregnancy, so important, that parental supply piece, alcohol and cancer, alcohol in the brain. And we're reviewing our website pages, and we're doing a lot of work on the SPHE curriculum with new digital tools and new digital interventions. So that was a real whistle-stop tour of alcohol in the brain. So I just want to thank you very much, and I'm hoping I kept within time. So thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks very much, Katie, for that comprehensive overview of alcohol and brain health across the life course. And now I'm delighted to introduce Professor Dara Cannon from the University of Galway, who will go into, I suppose, maybe more scientific information in relation to alcohol and brain health. So Dara, over to you.
Thanks so much, Evelyn. So yeah, this is a kind of a different way, I suppose, of thinking about it, and I'm going to try to dive a little bit into maybe how it does the harm and what exactly you can see. But I'm more than happy to take questions in the chat box as well. I'll be able to see it afterwards. So it is, obviously ethanol is a really small molecule, and that's something that I think scientifically explains and might be useful for people to understand. So normally when you take a drug or expose yourself to anything else, there's a blood-brain barrier, and those are there's sort of feet on the end of cells that wrap around the blood vessel and stop things that are in the blood getting into the brain. And obviously psychotropic drugs that have an effect on the brain bypass this. That's why they are useful, say, like, for example, antidepressants. But alcohol also bypasses it. So it's a really small molecule. It gets into the brain tissue, and that's where it does harm. So you can see the image of the brain, right? And how we look at it is obviously through scans. And so I'm going to try and show you a little bit about what has been done in terms of looking at, well, what effect does alcohol actually have on the brain? How much is too much, and what do we see that's happening? So one part of my job is to take very generous donors, our silent teachers of the university, to take the brain out, you can see on the left, and to put it in the hands of medical students and our healthcare professional students. And it's a really important moment where they realize that this is an organ and that it contains everything, your thoughts, your feeling, who you are, your experiences. It's very rich in terms of its sort of multifunctional role in your life. And the way we look at it, of course, looking at the postmortem brain isn't, it can tell us certain things, but it's not something that can tell us anything about a person while they're alive. And that's why most of the data I'll show you is using instead MRI scans. So that's an MRI scan in the middle. It's a T1 weighted MRI. What you're looking at is the same view. So it's between, hopefully you can see the marker, but it's a view of, say, dividing between the two hemispheres. So say straight down in the middle of, there's the conch of the nose right there. So there's the cerebellum, and this is all cerebrum, and this is white matter in the middle that connects the two hemispheres together, and that's the brainstem going to the spinal cord. And we can do different types of MRI. One particular type is called diffusion MRI. It just looks within and between the axons of those neurons. What direction is the diffusion oriented in? And these different types, MRI is very versatile. Sometimes we think of it just maybe as a scan, but you can look at the structure of the brain in terms of the gray matter and the thickness and how things are in terms of volume. And you can look at the orientation of these white matter fibers that I explain a little bit more. And you can also look at the function of the brain. So again, even maybe more so because we teach the brain with respect to it as a postmortem brain. And also, I think as we walk around as humans, we often think it's just an organ in there. We don't think of it like the heart or the lungs. The heart is beating constantly. We know that, we feel it. With the brain, we tend to think of it as just a static sort of lump of tissue, but look at it when you look at it in vivo and you see how much motion is there, right? It's a little amplified on the right so you can detect it, but you've got an arterial pulse, a constant blood supply, and that blood is helping people do what they do, think, and so forth. So when you think about that and then you scan, there's a couple of different measurements you can make. This is just a render of my own head with an axial section through, and this is frontal cortex. There's the caudate involved in insight and love. There's the thalamus. This is visual cortex back here, supporting kind of interpretation of what we see. And if we took this scan, right, this is all gray matter cortex on the outside, or a mantle, if you like, whereas the lighter area, that's white matter. So they're those axons of the fibers connecting, say, this piece of cortex to this piece of gray matter. So from gray through the white to another gray matter region. And over here, you can see in cross section, this is the outside, so the pia of the meninges, the inner thin layer. And then this is the boundary in yellow between the white and the gray. And if we measure the thickness of that gray matter region, where we do all of that synaptic transmission, where we think, where we make decisions, where we integrate things that are coming in and decide how to behave in response to them, the thickness of that, or the volume of the region, can be estimated. So we do that a lot in the lab. The poor students come in so enthusiastic, but then they start in the hard stuff. And so if we look at, say, this is a lateral surface, just looking in from the side at the brain, and you can see all of these different gyri, and they all have different functions. You know, the obvious ones here, you have your, this is the temporal lobe, and this is superior temporal gyrus. And on it, of course, we have that little bit of cortex called Wernicke's for speech comprehension. Similarly over here, then we have a Broca's area for speech production. And again, rather than it being, say, like a region does a job, we now know, of course, that it's all working together. And if we look at the activation of the brain, depicted by the orange and the yellow lines here across time, we can watch the function. What's beautiful about that is we could sometimes give a task and say, how is the brain functioning while you're doing something? Like in my own lab, we get people to try to inhibit emotion to do something basic. And that can be more difficult if you have depression or bipolar disorder. And by doing this at rest, when someone's not actually doing anything, we know that there are these different networks of regions that work together. So when I say network, for example, if you were speaking with a team of people and you ask one person in the team, well, what do? You don't know from their answer what the team achieves. You just know what their job in the team is. So in a way, when we think about one region in the brain like this one, and we might think executive function, actually, it's really only by looking at which regions are working together, these little patterns of red, that we can derive an overall function. And across many imaging studies in lots of groups around the world for a large number of people at this point, we can say that there are these broad functioning networks: vision, and hearing. They're fairly simple, nothing new there. This one's newer. This one's really interesting. The default mode network, it's the network of regions that are active when you're not trying to do something and you're not trying to pay attention. And these are affected in various disorders as well. So the next bit I'm going to do is to try to take some of what I've just told you and show you the effects of alcohol in it. And there are two ways of estimating risk. This is a calculator in the website that Katie just mentioned to ask about alcohol. And in that website, one of the tools is to assess your risk based on your alcohol use. So you can scan the QR code if you want and pop in the drinks. It's a very quick sort of two-step calculator, and it'll tell you whether you're at no risk, low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. Alternatively, Alcohol Action Ireland have another drinks calculator, and you put in a little bit more detail about what you use, and it'll quantify the units that you consume. And a lot of the scientific research will look at the effect of a unit of alcohol. So either of these calculators will be a great way to estimate where you would sit on the x-axis here. So this is the global effect of alcohol in the brain. So these are all of your bars here are the average volume of either grey matter in this one or white matter in this one. And again, your white matter are those areas connecting the different grey matter regions together. And the grey is where the synapses are that you're doing the actual thinking, decision making and processing. But of course, if the decisions made in one grey matter region can't transfer through white matter to get to some other grey matter region, then the connections are harmed and the networks won't function very well. So here we can see this is someone with no drinks every day consistently, so they don't even average above 0. Here, it might average to a half of a unit per day. So this would be, say, 3.5 units in a week. Here, it's someone who's averaging at 1.5 units a day consistently across time, and so forth, so on. So what you can see is when it's increased above the bar, this is your average, it's normalized to these two groups, right? So this is where the brain tissue should be when you consume no alcohol on a regular basis. But even when you reach an average of 1.5 drinks per day, you can see that different cortical regions and the thickness of that grey matter across the whole brain, averaging the entire thing, is lower. And you can see that that effect is greater the more units of alcohol someone's taking. So binge drinking, or say on average more than 4 drinks, will be very harmful to the cortex, and you're reducing the thickness and reducing the volume of those cortical regions. And it does damage the white matter as well. So you can see that the white matter is reducing in its volume over time with these drinks. So just to break that out a little, here's some regions, right? So we try to think about it functionally for the person. When you go to the shop and you are trying to remember what you thought you needed to buy, the hippocampus is a region very involved in a network for remembering things. This is your overall grey matter. And binging is clearly more harmful over time. And it's not the same for everyone. Someone with high blood pressure or a high body mass index, they're at greater risk of this grey matter reduction with that number of alcohol drinks taken. This, as I mentioned at the beginning, that's a white matter region. It's called the corpus callosum, and it's connecting the two hemispheres of the brain together. And it really does connect the functions of both hemispheres in lots of different ways. And in red, you can see reductions in those areas as a result of alcohol consumption. So this is part of the corpus callosum impacted here, and various parts of the corpus callosum impacted here as well. So this is a really important tract, and it's been impacted by alcohol as well. So let's step back for a sec again and think about that network idea. The grey matter are the balls, the white matter are the sticks connecting the different balls or spheres together. And the network, say, underpinning different function like emotion, memory, and so forth, they are impacted in their function by alcohol. So we really do know a lot more and can speak a lot more away from, say, a region by region effect and saying, oh, well, it might affect one thing more than the other. It's actually affecting the entire brain. And as you know, because these networks recruit the same region for different functions in different teams, and certain team members have a critical role relative to others, those impacts can be really widespread. And that's why there isn't kind of a, well, alcohol does X, it doesn't do X, it actually does everything that we do when we function. This is lifespan brain health. So this is kind of, I suppose I'll reflect back to some of the things Katie said about the brain not being developed till 25 and also during pregnancy critically. So let's focus in there for a second. Fetal brain development. If you take just a look here first, right, this is white matter and this is grey matter, and these are your ventricles, the large spaces inside that should be relatively small. As they get larger, it's an indicator of a little bit less health, and they're generally getting larger as your grey is getting lower. So they're just spaces, if you like. But take a look across age, right? These are from 20, but you can see that that white matter is not high as you're born. It's increasing over time, and the grey decreases over time. So you're born with it, so the decrease is bad. At the very early stages, you're just creating the neural tube, and then you're actually birthing neurons, and then you're forming the connections between the neurons. And during that time, you also have cells that are trying to move from one region to another. And you have the axons, they're trying to be myelinated. So you're producing cells that actually make the myelin, which is the insulation sheet that allows the white matter to communicate its electrical signals efficiently from one region to another. Arborization, the arbor of a tree is its expanse. You know, these are large, beautiful trees. Some of them are much narrower than others. The health of a neuron is the size of its arbor, and it allows it to connect to lots of other regions. So these are happening through fetal brain development before birth, massively in the first up to birth. The first year from birth is a huge and critical window of brain development. Second year, slightly less so than the first, but still really critical, and so on and so forth. Adolescence is an absolutely, unfortunately, critical period. I say unfortunately because it's when, of course, they come home and they say, I'd like to take a drink. Well, hopefully, they'd come home and say, I think I'm going to have a drink with my friends, and your soul is burned. And the reason I say that's so critical is that if you take a look here, the grey matter is plentiful in red and yellow, and it's decreasing from 5, even much more critically, 15 to 20, as they lose pieces they don't need. And you don't want to interfere with that natural pruning, which is to do with efficiency as they grow and mature. You know that their behavior is more erratic at this stage, and their brain is in a huge flux of development. So 95% of the maximum total volume of grey matter is at age 6 years old. And your lobal grey matter max age is 10 to 16. And it's going to begin to decline from there in a healthy way and stabilize across your midlife, and then begin to decrease in later life as well. So 25 before it's fully finished all of these processes and stable. Adulthood then is about preservation and protection, right? Watching that decline that's happening in both the grey and the white, and you're trying to protect against that decline. We can estimate what age your brain is, right? So you have a particular age and your brain is another age. Hopefully they're really close together and the same. And we can see that people who don't drink, their brain age may be a little lower on average than chronological age. And then that changes as people drink, right? So if you are drinking daily or almost daily, you are aging your brain at a greater rate than your own actual chronological age in life. I think these are useful normative estimations, even though they really just take the brain as a whole. And again, it's not the same for everyone. If you're dealing or speaking with anyone with anxiety, depression, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, any of these disorders, alcohol has a greater impact. It has a greater impact on women than men. It has a greater impact on people with a risk for any brain disorder, all of the psychiatric disorders, and as described very nicely by Katie, all of the neurological disorders, dementia, stroke, and so forth. And we can clearly see that when someone has bipolar disorder, their alcohol consumption is causing a greater negative impact on different regions that are already damaged or deficient or abnormal in some way due to having the disorder. So there is a greater risk for people who are struggling. So I am going to close up with something a little brighter, which is that if someone stops, so what you're looking at here are the days abstinent from 0, so forth. In red, in general, you're looking at approximately 7.3 months. So here they have a scan 3 times. Their first scan is in blue, their second scan is in green, and the third scan is in red, longitudinally in the same individuals. The individuals in this have alcohol use disorder. So they're starting at this baseline with some of the impact on some of the memory cortices and some of the cortices involved in emotion processing. And they're starting at a lower level. And when they abstain from alcohol and they drink no alcohol in a sustained way across those 7 months, you can see this increase, right? So an increase in the actual thickness of these regions critical to memory and emotion processing is happening over those 7 months. And we don't have longitudinal studies greater than that, but you can imagine that that they're on a track to normalize. So I think one of the key messages, again, if you're speaking to someone and they're really struggling, is that it's reversible. It's not a hopeless case. It's not that you've done damage and that will remain. It is that if you abstain or minimize in any way, that is useful. So to finish, really, you're looking, I think there's just no doubt, and I hope I've kind of convinced you from looking at the brain that it's detectable, severe brain and behavior alterations are associated with high alcohol use. And if you can move yourself to moderate, you are still facing a risk of several medical conditions, but it's substantially better than this severe brain issues. Similarly, again, if you can kind of move yourself into the low gradually, if that's possible, you have a negative effect on the brain and cognition, and we can see that and quantify those effects. But clearly, for anyone at risk already, or anyone with a family history of dementia or some of the different inheritable disorders, trying to get into that space where you have just a complete abstinence and you are then in the zone of protection of the brain, minimization of your brain age, and preservation of that tissue for its critical function in our lives. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope that was helpful.
Thanks very much, Dara, for that fascinating overview in terms of, I suppose, the science and just the impact of alcohol in the brain. Anyway, so this is just to highlight, I suppose, before we get into the questions and answers, some of the information leaflets that are available, I suppose, from healthpromotion.ie, which is a HSE, if you like, resource. So this is looking at, I suppose, across the population, there's kind of various leaflets looking at different kind of target groups, ranging from the very early stages to the whole issue of alcohol and pregnancy, then focusing on children, I suppose, and the impact of them in terms of the whole area of hit and harm. There's a very good booklet in terms of for targeting, I suppose, parents, in particular in terms of alcohol and drugs. It's very detailed, I suppose, advice and guidance in relation to approaching that. And then more specifically, there's one just targeting young people themselves and the family and alcohol. And then we're moving into, I suppose, there's specific ones that are targeted at women, there's one at men, and there's one on getting older. So that's kind of almost across the life course in a way. There's nearly a leaflet, if you want to call it that, targeting kind of each of the population groups. And then the specifically one just in relation to alcohol and cancer. So they're all available on healthpromotion.ie. If you just do the search function on alcohol, you'll be able to access them. In addition to that, and Katie alluded, I mean, the main resource in a general sense is they ask about alcohol.ie. Also, I suppose there's the drugs.ie HSE kind of website as well, or webpage, if you like, has some information as well in relation that's relevant to alcohol, and specifically, I suppose, maybe particularly if you're looking for information on young people and alcohol. It also has some signposts and some services and supports available. In addition, I suppose, to people who may or may not be aware, the HSE has an alcohol, and alcohol and drugs helpline. So that's kind of available Monday to Friday, kind of 9:30 to 5:30. And that's just for people themselves, but it's also if you think for family members or others that are concerned about others, or have any questions in relation to that. And there's that you can email that obviously as well. So it's a free phone kind of number. And then the email address is there, so we can if people are looking for a copy, we can circulate the information in relation to this. In terms of as from I suppose to learning a bit more information in terms of just hearing experts or people talk about the topic, the HSE has Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast series, and I suppose over the last year or so, there's been a number. This isn't all of them. This is just a selection of some of the podcasts that's focused specifically on alcohol. So there's one focusing specifically on alcohol and pregnancies. These are around ranging, I suppose, from 30 to 60 minutes, but it can be a bit more in-depth information on some of the topics that we've kind of touched a bit on today. But if people were interested in a bit more information, so one on alcohol and pregnancy, as I said, very much one around alcohol and parents, and looking at the significant influence that parents have kind of on their young people, and then one just more around young people, alcohol and health. So just to flag those particular ones with you. In addition to that, Katie, and then I suppose the truth about alcohol and cancer was was another one, just specifically looking at that particular topic. In addition, the HSE, I suppose, as part of Katie referenced, as part of in relation to FASD awareness, there was a toolkit developed, so that has kind of pulled together nicely some of the resources that are available in relation to that. And also, I suppose, a toolkit in terms of supporting parents, protecting young people from alcohol-related harm. So those kind of resources are, I suppose, have been developed by the HSE and are available. In addition, some of you may be aware or familiar with the HSE has a Making Every Contact Count program. So this is very much trying to target health professionals in terms of their interactions with their service users and trying to, I suppose, encourage them to raise issues, including alcohol, in terms of, I suppose, health behaviour change ultimately. There's an online module, there's a number of online modules in relation to, as part of the Making Every Contact Count program, and one of those is alcohol. And then once people complete the modules, the online modules, then there's an opportunity for people to attend a half-day kind of, if you like, brief intervention. So it's around how you might raise some of those topics with people in your practice. And then Orla is going to talk more about the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force and the resources and stuff that they have.
Morning, everyone. I suppose just in addition to the resources mentioned by Evelyn and Katie and Dara, here are some resources that we as the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force have developed regionally. So we have resources for speaking to preteens and younger children around alcohol, and then some guides for talking to and some information for guidance and discussing the issue with your teenagers, as well as some resources for teenagers themselves. And as of last week, they're all now available on, we've just launched a parent hub, which is a hub for parents and guardians, anybody working with young people, where we have all the resources for young people. And we've broken it down to preteens, teenagers, and 18 plus, because we know a lot of 18-year-olds and older are still living at home and are still in care of parents and guardians. So we'd advise just like people to log on there, and it could guide you through accessing the different resources depending on your situation or what you're looking for, as well as information and resources on supports and treatment should you feel you need that for the young person in your life. And I suppose on the line of supports as well, we offer SARE brief intervention and training for problem alcohol and substance use. And this is a training program for people working, volunteering, who may find themselves in a situation to have a conversation with somebody around alcohol and or substances. And it just guides them around having that conversation, how to approach it, and referring on and where the services that they refer on to. And then for family members of those living with somebody with a substance use or alcohol issue, or as mentioned, an alcohol-related brain injury, our family support service provides supports to family members and concerned individuals. And in particular, there's interest in relation to the alcohol-related brain injury. And you can see here there's a leaflet around if you are living with somebody who drinks a lot and you may be concerned that they may have an alcohol-related brain injury. This leaflet will give you lots of information around trying to figure that out and what supports you can get for them and yourselves. And we also offer a training program on alcohol-related brain injury, which will take place in the autumn in October. So there's a lot of resources. That's just a quick flavour. These are more our regional resources, and they're all available on our website, www.wrdatf.ie.
And to just say thanks very much, and we'll be in touch and hope to see you at other events. So thanks very much, everyone, and have a nice day.